Before we watched TV shows and movies on Narcos, and even before Pablo Escobar's rise to fame, there was one man who was the ultimate narco. He lived the narco life of greed, money, and power, but found a way to reclaim his life and use his astonishing experiences to empower others to live a life of hope, meaning, and redemption. Welcome to the Narco Mindset Podcast, where Dr. Jorge Valdes shares his journey through life before and after the Medellin drug cartel, from torture and multiple prison sentences to how he refocused his life onto a path of principles learned as a narco. It's time to share that raw truth with you, right here on the Narco Mindset Podcast, with your host, Dr. Jorge Valdes.
Welcome to the Narco Mindset Podcast. My name is Dr. Jorge Valdes, and I am very, very excited to take you through this journey for the next 3 episodes. I am here with my co-host, Anthony Petrucci. Anthony, we've been planning this for a long time. Finally, the day has come.
Yes, it's finally here, and listeners are in for a treat today because you're going to start telling your story as a narco. What happened when you were a leader in the biggest drug cartel in the world? What came before it? And then what happened after you got out of the cartel and lived to tell about it? After listening to this episode and the next couple of episodes, people are really going to have a good sense of who you are, Jorge.
You know, Anthony, it's an honor for me to do this podcast. I've really been praying about it a lot, and I've really been thinking a lot about, what is the purpose? I was extremely happy being retired, just living the life of a dad. So what happened in my life that made me come back and then start speaking again? We published 3 books in the last 4 months and writing again. What drove me to that point? Basically 2 things. Number one, it was a wife that was praying that I did not let my life go to waste. And then I did an event in Houston that really, really challenged me. I really didn't even want to do it. It was just a matter of fact that I asked this priest to do me a favor and do a mass we built the only Catholic chapel inside a United States prison at Angola. And every December 12th, we go there to celebrate that day. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to get a priest. I finally got one. He came, did the mass, convicted me that I needed to do him a favor in return. And I went and did an event in Houston that challenged my life again. But when I speak, one of the things that I tell people is, I start out by story. There's 2 kids. To start out, they're both immigrant children. They both come from Cuba, and they both come to America. One decides to be an honor student, works for the federal government, goes on and has a tremendous career, then has a conversion, becomes a scholar, teaches at a prestigious university, and goes on with a wonderful life. The other young immigrant kid also comes from Cuba at the same age, and he also starts out on the right path. Did not do drugs, didn't smoke, didn't drink. But all of a sudden, something happened in his life where he goes from being this amazing young, clean-cut kid to becoming U.S. head of all operations for a group that became the Medellin drug cartel. Goes to prison, suffers tortures. What happened? What's the difference? What do both of these young immigrant kids have in common? I look around the room and people wonder. Eventually, somebody sometimes figures it out. At the end of the day, what they both have in common is that they're both the same person. I speak to crowds all over the place. And I ask a lot of parents, when you're sitting right there in front of you and you're looking at your 12, 13-year-old kid, and you think in your mind that only bad things happen to bad kids, that there's nothing bad can happen to your kid. Well, I'm here to tell you something. My mom said that, identically said that. The difference also with my mom was she was a very religious person. Christ became the center of our life from a young age. And you can imagine the pain in my mother, who left Cuba, a life of wealth, to come to the United States and work in a factory, suffer, go hungry, to one day realize that her son is U.S. head of all operations for a group that became the Medellin drug cartel. As I look back in my life, I tell it in 3 stages. But stage number 1 is that day coming from Cuba. I remember it was October 11, 1966, and here I was in bed. Went to bed the night before, had no idea what was going on in our home. Mom never mentioned that something drastic was about to happen. And all of a sudden, I remember her waking me up early in the morning and said, "Let's go, get dressed, we're leaving." And I'm like, "What? Leaving what?" And she's like, "Yeah, we're leaving Cuba and we're going to America." So I went to try to get some toys, and she's like, "Jorge, no toys, just the clothes that you have on, a belt, a pair of shoes, and a sock." Can you imagine all of a sudden I'm in shock. Why are we leaving? Why are we leaving our friends? Why are we leaving our toys? Why are we leaving everything that means anything to us? We headed to the airport and then something drastically happened. I remember sitting there with my brother who was 9 and my sister was 5, and I see my mother and father crying. My mother just argued with my father as they were coming towards us, and then she comes up to where I am, tears in his eyes, grabs my hand and says, Jorge, take your brother and sister to Miami. I'll see you one day, son. God will go with you. And I'm here to tell you, at that moment in time, my father, who never wanted to come, said, if you're not going, I'm not coming. They have made an error in her passport and said she could not leave. Literally, my world just got shattered at that moment. Because as I look at my world, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, we're leaving everything that means anything to us. How can this happen? If our whole life was that God is in the center of our life, here we are in Miami, 11 of us sleeping in a one-bedroom apartment, writing down on a piece of paper what time we're going to get up in the morning and take a piss, because the truth, it was 11 people in one bathroom, and all of a sudden realizing that we don't even have money to eat. I mean, literally no money to eat. You know, I remember in the morning, my dad used to make us eggs, 2 raw eggs with this powdery milk the government gave him. And that's it. That's all the food that we would have. So that day became the first of climatic moments in my life where I make a decision. There is no God. God is not real. My mother's crazy. I should have listened to Fidel when he was telling us that God is only for weak people that need some type of an imaginary being or an imaginary belief to find answers because they're just weak. Well, by no means was Jorge Valdes weak. That moment, there's no God. All of a sudden, I remember I was in school and my brother and I used to fight kids. You know, we felt like we were Robin Hood. We looked at the kids that were a little overweight. You know, that happens in America. We would just take their lunch money. I remember Brother Timothy, who was the principal, one day saying, George, you keep taking kids' lunch money, I'm going to whoop your ass. And I remember he'd take out the big old ruler and just whoop us with us. And I was just hoping he didn't tell my parents. But then I would look at him and he said, are you going to do it again? I said, Brother Timothy, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, I'm going to do it again. Why? I said, because your ass whooping, it feels less painful than going all day long with no food in my stomach. And I remember him looking at me and smiling and said, look, if they're stupid and weak enough to let you take their money, just go ahead and take it. And I went like that. And, you know, and then my whole life was about getting rich. My whole life was, what do I need to do? I'm going to work hard, sacrifice whatever it takes, because the day I make money, I'm going to be somebody. I remember the second day we had just been here from Cuba, and my cousin came over, and he had this beautiful candy apple red GTO with a white interior. This is 1966. And I looked at the car, and the first thought that went through my mind is, man, my cousin's only been here 4 years, and he already has this beautiful car. You know what? One day I'm going to have a car just like that or better. And I continued my life in that manner. I decided I was going to continue to work hard. I remember another interesting story that was funny was, one day I come home from school and tell my father that I discovered that this friend of mine, George Bustillo, has got food stamps. They had just come from Cuba a year before us. And I said, he eats lunch, he takes a sandwich and a fruit and a drink. And he says because his parents get food stamps and they go to the grocery store and exchange their food stamp for groceries. Have you heard about that, Dad? And my dad, very serious, very stoic, he looked at me and said, yes. And then I said, Dad, how come we don't get food stamps? He said, George, food stamp is for poor people. And you must understand something. Poor people that get help from the government will remain poor all their lives. The government assistance is for those that really are incapable, that they're handicapped or really have an illness that they're incapable of providing for themselves. But I see you got 2 legs, son. So he points a finger on my chest and he says, you get up early in the morning and you figure out how to help feed your family. I was 10 years old. I look back today and that day my childhood ended. At the age of 10, I became a man. And I did. I was real skinny. I remember delivering newspapers in the morning, coming home from school, washing cars, cutting grass, doing whatever I had to do to make money and give my parents every penny I earned because I didn't want to be poor. And if poor depended upon me overcoming and working and contributing, well, I would do whatever I could. Didn't matter that I was 10. See, I never looked at my life and said, I'm 10, what can I do? Or I can do this. My entire life has had one mindset that I highlight in the book called Narco Mindset. My whole mindset is not that I can do something, but how do I do that? Because I am convinced that if someone's done something in this world, I can do it too. But I might have to work harder. I might have to work longer. I might have to sacrifice more. But there's nothing that someone has done that I can do. And that's how I lived my life. 3 years later in Miami, not being able to eat, we ended up, the refugee department resettled us in New Jersey. We had a cousin there that lived in Union City, New Jersey. And like typical of all Cubans, right? All Cuban immigrants. One of the things that we all had in common was whenever someone came from Cuba, we let them live in our house. And they didn't have to pay rent. They didn't have to buy food. They lived there for free for 3 months. And the understanding among all Cubans was, I do that for one Cuban, and then another Cuban's going to do it for me. So after 3 months living with our cousins, we ended up moving into a neighborhood that I call Vietnam. It was Jersey City. And I'm talking about Jersey City when Jersey City was the ghetto of all ghettos. They called our building was Vietnam because it was the corner of 4 bars. And every night there would be a shootout in that bar. We ended up getting 3 months free of rent because when we walked into the apartment, it was full. It had shit all over the walls. People had peed in the floors. So the landlord said, hey, if you clean it up, you get free rent. Well, my parents, who did not care about working, decided, hey, you know what? That's wonderful for us. And and that was a lesson for me because here's something that's interesting. My mother was literally born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Her dad was a famous general in Maceo army that liberated Cuba from Spain. And my mother was born when he was older. And she always had everything. My mother used to travel to New York. She had a boyfriend who played for the New York Yankees. So she spoke perfect English. She went to University of Havana when hardly no woman ever went to school and got a degree as a school teacher. And then my father, he was different. He was born very, very poor. But, at the age of 13, he went to work in a cafe. And in that cafe, there was this young man that used to come every day. This young man, Oscar, was 18. And Oscar was the son of the richest man in Cuba. A man that used to print the money for the government. He had come from Spain in the late 1800s and built the biggest mansion that there was in Havana. He founded the Havana Yacht Club, Pony Club. Very, very wealthy guy. And he saw that my father, was a hustler. My father was real, real fast. Even though he dropped out of high school, my father was a genius because he read constantly without ceasing. When my father was about 21 years old, Oscar approached him and said, hey, Bevo, how would you like to come and open a business with me? Apparently his parents were harassing him to do something. And he did with my dad. And they opened a sawmill and my father became very, very wealthy. So I saw this to people that left Cuba. We had cars for every kid had a chauffeur. We had a gorgeous home. We lacked absolutely nothing. And all of a sudden my dad is coming to the U.S. to clean toilets for JCPenney. And my mother is coming and she's working in the tomato fields because she wants to be there when her children wake up and when her children go to bed. So my parents became my giants. My parents became my greatest role model because if they could do that, if they could sacrifice that, then I realized the greatest sin in the world to me was not being able to provide for your family. So whatever it took, I was going to work. So I started working when we came back from New Jersey in 1973 to Miami. A friend of my dad got me an interview with the Federal Reserve Bank, and I got a job working there. I was 17 years old and the youngest employee in the Federal Reserve Bank. I went to school at the University of Miami full-time and worked full-time. I can tell people what I did every day of my life, literally for the next 4 years. I slept very, very little because I wanted to graduate with honors. See, I've lived all my life believing that, hey, to come in second place just means that you're the first loser. That, I'm going to give it all I got. Because if you give it all you got in this world, then you realize that whatever happens, it just happens. But the worst thing for any human being to live with, and for myself, is with that, what if? What if I had gotten that job? What if I had not lost that job? What if I had been responsible? What if I had been truthful, honorable? Those were the things that my dad instilled in us from the very, very early age. Yeah, I got a great education at the University of Miami, but I'm going to tell you something. The greatest education of all, I got from my father. Why do I say that? Number one, because he was a very, very simple man, no money, foreign country at the age of 40 without speaking the language. My mother left behind. She didn't come again until December of that year. But my father would always look at my brother and I and said, son, let me tell you something. In life, you have no control whether you're rich or poor. My brother and I would roll our eyes and say, no kidding. We figured that out pretty quick. He would say, in life, you have no control whether you're sick or healthy. Even more, in life, you have no control whether you're dead or alive. He says, son, the only thing that you have absolute control in this world is your word. Only you can break it. Only you can keep it. And I lived like that my entire life. I lived making sure that no matter whatever happened in my life, whatever I did, I was not going to give the only thing I had absolute power of. That's why at the age of 23, I laid in the floor of a Panamanian prison being tortured day and night to the point where I bled for 5 years because I was willing not to break my word. It's very interesting because we live in a world today that truth means absolutely nothing. And it's sad because if truth means absolutely nothing, whatever is applicable at whatever time and place, then the world has absolutely no meaning. If truth means nothing, then what does it mean to be honest? What does integrity mean? Truth is the foundation of who we are as a human being. We tell our children, don't lie. But then we tell them when someone is calling that we don't want to talk to, tell them, hey, you know what? I'm not here. So we're constantly lying in front of our children, then we expect them to tell us the truth. We got to set the example. We have to be the person that we want our children to become. And we got to realize that when our daughters look at us, chances are they're going to marry someone that acts and talks just like us. The same thing, our children, our sons will treat their wives the same way that I treat my wife. So, I lived that life very, very honest, working hard. At the age of 20, I was about to graduate from the University of Miami, and I remember my accounting professor, a guy named Jack Snee, really, really good friend of mine. He used to be a partner with Price & Waterhouse in Michigan. He moved to Miami, and he realized in Miami that he did not speak the language of heaven. You see, Anthony, I let people know real clearly, if you want to talk when you get to heaven, you better be learning how to speak Spanish. Because even for me, I'm even more convinced than anybody that Jesus was a Cuban. But anyway, I went ahead and he said to me, hey, George, if you do my clients who don't speak any English, I'll go ahead and give you a secretary, an office, and everything that you want to get started. It was a hard decision because I was so focused. I was going to work for the Federal Reserve Bank. I was going to graduate from Miami at the age of 20. I was going to graduate from law school by 24. I had 6 years to be a millionaire by 30. That was my goal. That's what drove me. That's what made me have the same life day in and day out. That's what made me not date. That's what made me live a very, very boring life because I was laser focused on my goal. See, if you don't have a goal in life to know where you're going to go in life, how are you going to get there? How are you going to develop that roadmap that's going to teach you how to get to where you're going to get? So I said to myself, if I stay at the Federal Reserve Bank, it's going to be a slow go. But if I open up my own practice, I'm in control of my own destiny. And for whatever reason that still to today, I look back in my life and I wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed at the Federal Reserve Bank? Sometimes it's painful because I think I could have become Fed chairman, I could have become a bank president, I could have become anything. I was the only employee at the Federal Reserve Bank that they paid to go to University of Miami. Everybody else went to the state college. So I took that job. And the first client he gave me was a little grocery store in Miami. I would say that on a strip mall, probably 15 feet wide, maybe 20 feet wide by 40, 50 feet in depth. Just a little bitty grocery store. I was supposed to go there every Monday to balance the books, and they would pay me $1,000 a month. Man, you think about seeing heaven. I thought heaven for the first time in my life, even though I didn't believe in no heaven, really was there. It's like $1,000 a month. I had a great salary at the Federal Reserve Bank. And I think I made 3 times minimum wage, and I was making $3 something an hour, roughly $130, $140 a week. So imagine $1,000 for just a few hours every Monday morning. I went to see that client that first Monday morning. When I entered the grocery store and I said hello to the owners, they took me to the back office and they said, here's what we bought. And in that shopping bag, I looked at it and there was $100,000. Think about it. Counted that thing 3 times. And I'm like, $100,000, my God, how can this little bitty grocery store make that much money? See, I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything about how Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 fish and 3 loaves of bread. But I'm going to tell you something right here. If I had known that, I said, man, Jesus has absolutely nothing on those Colombians. They didn't have the fish, they didn't have the bread, but they multiplied nothing into hundreds of thousands of dollars. I looked at the receipts and there was $800 worth of receipts. That's all they had bought. Out of $800, how can they get $100,000? I was so naive. Like I said, I never done, nothing. Literally, I was a nerd. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to let it pass and then we'll wait, next week and see what happens. When I show up next week, I'll be darned. There was about $75,000, $80,000. And I'm like, it's impossible because this time there was about $45, $50 worth of receipts. Literally, that grocery store sold nothing. I waited again, and then the third week when I saw 120, 125,000, that's it. I'm done. I'm going from naive and an idiot, wanting to give everyone the benefit of the doubt to there's something seriously wrong here. So I called him. I remember sitting him down and saying, hey, Alvaro, let me explain something to you. Alvaro, there's a very basic accounting formula, and it works like this. I knew the guy couldn't read or write, so I'm figuring I'm trying to explain this to a 3-year-old. I said, you buy something for $1, and then you sell it for $2, and your profit is $1. So, for example, the first week I was here, your receipts were $800. Let's say you sold those things 3 times what you paid for. That's $2,400. But all of a sudden, there's $100,000. The following week, it was even worse. In the third week, in this week. So what's going on? He hesitated not 1 second to start laughing in my face. And I'm like, man, I start turning red. I feel like an idiot. I said, what is so funny? He said, George, that's not groceries that we sell. We sell cocaine. We're drug dealers. Now imagine the shock that I went through. All of a sudden, this young kid that had never did anything wrong in his life worked for the Federal Reserve Bank. All the alcohol I ever drank in my life was probably the equivalent of a teacup. all of a sudden finding out you're working for drug dealers. You know, it really bothered me a lot. It bothered me for about 20 seconds. 20 seconds because that's how quickly we are to be able to justify our actions. Immediately I said to myself, George, you're an accountant. That's what you were trained to do. You're not breaking the law. There was no money laundering laws at that time. Whatever you do, you do. He said, look, George, the thing is, we have currency restrictions in our country. So we can't take the money down there. And we want to keep our money in US dollars. Now, we heard that you work for the government. Do you know how to open foreign bank accounts? I thought for a minute. I said, yes, I know exactly how to open foreign bank account. I know where you open them, and I know what it takes. I knew that it would cost about $700 plus the travel to go to a country like Grand Cayman or Tortola. Out of the tip of my tongue, I said, it costs about $10,000 per account plus the expenses. He didn't hesitate for a minute. He said, when can you open us 3 accounts? I said, 3 accounts? And again, I saw heaven open up. I saw angels cheering and the trumpets playing. And I'm like, next week. They gave me $30,000 and I headed to Grand Cayman. And I remember opening my first 3 accounts, made contact with a great law firm over there. I knew that that's what they did in the Cayman from working at the Federal Reserve Bank, because we had busted a guy that he had like a ring where he owned various banks, and then he borrowed money from one bank to pay off the money he had stolen. Where some of the accounts of the people lending him the money, which was himself, were number accounts in the Cayman. In the Federal Reserve Bank, we did some research and found out anybody could walk over there, hire a law firm, and for $750, you got yourself a number account. I went there and I opened those 3 accounts, and from there, I started opening numerous other accounts. Then I started taking care of their money. I started figuring out a scheme on how I can trace, based upon the knowledge I had, how I can set up accounts in the United States, transfer money to one account that would immediately split that money into 2 accounts, into 2 transfers to 2 different countries. So at the end of the day, they would all the money will land in another account in another country, because by now I'm opening accounts in Tortola, Liechtenstein, in different countries like that. So I created this very, very intriguing web. So I remember one day, there was this guy that used to come over all the time to the grocery store. Real friendly guy. His name was Jaime. He did not speak English, couldn't read or write himself. But I remember he had this beautiful BMW motorcycle and a super nice guy. He was always asking me all kinds of things. He was always asking me, how things worked and how did I open the money, how the government could not trace it, etc., etc. Then one day he says to me, I want to introduce you to some friends of mine. I said, sure. He said, they're interested in opening a business in the United States, and they want to hire someone that can do everything from A to Z. They want to start importing bananas. So I'm saying to myself, well, that's pretty good. I'll do a feasibility study for them, charge them for that, and then, go from there. So I never forget that first day when I met Manuel Garces, who went on to become my godfather, who went on to become the guy that was the founding member of the group that became the Medellin drug cartel. He was an amazing guy, very religious guy, honest, went to mass every day, family man, and very, very professional. He came with 3 other guys. And he said, we heard a lot about you, and we're interested in opening this banana company. As a matter of fact, we're interested in even buying a ship so that we can go ahead and pick up our own bananas and bring them here. All along, I was so naive. I thought these people legitimately wanted to become banana distributors. He said, we're looking for a point man. We're looking for someone to do all the work for us, open up the entire infrastructure, and become the president. Would you be interested? I looked at them and I said, sure, I'll be interested, but that means I would have to leave my accounting practice. And if I have to do that, I want to be partners and I have no money for capital. You'll have to put up my part of it. And then also a $6,000 salary. They looked at me and I thought they would hesitate. And just in a brief of a moment, the seed to what would end up changing my life forever was planted. They said, sure. Shook my hand and they left. My world started to change. I lived in the world where I had this friend of mine at the Federal Reserve Bank. All we would do is go to a wrestling Wednesdays in Miami Beach. I had no money to date. The girlfriend that I had, all I could do is take her in my beat up Chevrolet Vega, and we would drive to Miami Beach and see all those mansions. Sit there and just park the car and just watch all those Rolls Royce and exotic cars go by us. And I would look at her and say, Nettie, you know what? I promise one day we're going to live in a house like that. One day I'm going to own a car like that. And she believed that I would. She knew how hard I worked. I was a straight-A student, working full-time and going to school full-time. So when I saw that opportunity come, I started to have different friends. And I started making money. And then I entered into the circle of the rich and famous. My role models. Those people I wanted to be like. Celebrities. People that I admired for so long. People that I thought were just happy and full of life. They had everything the world had to offer. And they meant something. They were somebody. I had nothing and I was a nobody. So I remember going to this party and I saw something that would change my life. That would be the second cataclysmic moment in my life. I saw a federal judge that used to give people lots of time for any drug offense, snorting cocaine. I said to myself, at the age of 10, there was no God. At the age of 20, there is no morals in America. Once we started opening the banana company and we flew to California to look for a landing craft, it was one of those old Navy boats that drew little water, literally can pull up to shore and drop a gate so that the Navy would be able to load up their equipment onto the boat. So we went out there, we saw a boat that we liked and we purchased it. But now, all of a sudden, I start becoming friendly with these people and they keep asking me, you're a brilliant young kid, you're smart, you don't have a traffic ticket, you're clean cut, you can make a lot of money handling all our U.S. operations for us. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? He said, all our cocaine distribution. Listen, I was happy opening the foreign bank account. I was happy, opening this banana business, but by no means was I going to be involved. First of all, I didn't even know what the damn cocaine looked like. So I'm like, no, you know what? It's better for you guys that I stay legit. I'm handling your money. Literally at that time, I was handling many, many millions of dollars a month. Nothing like a year later when I became U.S. head of that operation. And I was handling over $100 million a month. So, they kept harassing me. And I'm like, man, how do I get rid of these people? I went to California. So we bought this ship and we're getting it all retrofitted. And we ended up having some problems with the people I had there. So I decided I was going to go there and spend about a month, overseeing the installation of all the refrigeration equipment and all the different modifications that we needed to do to the ship. So while I was out there, I met this guy, Mel, and he was the guy that was doing the refrigeration for us. He knew I played baseball when I was young. And he was like, yeah, you want to come and be part of my softball team. And the minute I became part of the softball team, I was the star of the team. And we became pretty good friends. He would invite me over to his house for dinner all the time. And about 2-3 weeks working with us, he started telling me, hey, George, I know what that boat is going to be for. That boat's cocaine boat. And I'm like, Mel, you're full of shit. Listen, this is the banana boat. Do you think that I would be the president in a company that was going to bring in drugs? Little did I know that I was already that. Kept harassing me, and I'm like, man, I got to get rid of this guy. So I remember one day I thought I had this genius of an idea. We're going to go ahead and stop episode number 1 right here at this point, Anthony. And the listeners just going to have to stay tuned so that they can hear in the next episode number 2, what was that brilliant idea that I had in my mind that I thought was going to get me to stop these people from bothering me. Imagine, one group wanted me to sell them cocaine. This other group in Colombia that would eventually be known as the Medellin Drug Cartel wanted me to handle all operations in the United States. What did that mean? Can you imagine? 20-year-old kid, 1976, never done anything wrong in his life, being in charge of a major drug network? My God, I didn't even know what cocaine looked like. So as we finish this episode, Anthony, in episode 1, just to summarize, I describe how those events at a young age, they end up defining your behavior for many years. Think about it. I was just a young, clean, 10-year-old kid from a wealthy family in Cuba, suddenly not knowing anything. I'm woken up and told I'm going to Miami. Miami was supposed to be the place where my mother could raise us in a Christian home. Miami was supposed to be the place where we would encounter the American dream. But yet, my mother's left behind. We go live in a 1-bedroom apartment, going hungry, writing down what time we're going to piss in the morning because 11 of us had to use one bathroom. And suddenly my cousin appeared in this gorgeous car. Believe it or not, my new American dream that would dictate my life for many years to come is born. I realized that moment in time that I would never be anybody until I had gorgeous cars. I had mansions, women, and power. Yet I believe that I would achieve all that still working hard until that day that I crossed that line. And this is going to be one of the most important messages I bring to our listeners. It's about crossing line. As you will see in the next episode, you will hear how crossing one simple line that I had defined that I never would, my life would change and I would go from being the American dream to America's nightmare. So thank you so much for listening. I pray that you come back next week. Episode number 2 will continue this saga of the story behind the story, how the Medellin Drug Cartel came to be. Who was there before Pablo Escobar? Who were the original narcos? Have a wonderful week. And if you like this episode, please subscribe to my webpage, www.jorgevaldesphd.com. Great news. The first 3,000 subscribers, I will email them a PDF of our new published book, Narco Mindset Freedom Edition. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a condensed form of my original book, and it just makes you think and wonder what is my life all about. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for tuning in to the Narco Mindset Podcast.
We've come to the conclusion of this episode of the Narco Mindset Podcast, but your path towards hope, meaning, and redemption continues. For more information and resources to help you on your path towards finding a life built on integrity, honor, and truth, head to JorgeValdesPh.D.com and join our community. We appreciate you joining us for this episode and look forward to helping you find your turning point right here on the Narco Mindset Podcast.